Your 20s are a time when you're full of energy, full of testosterone, and for good reason. We need desire to reproduce and carry on humanity. And throughout our teenage years, most of us lost control of this energy, which created poor habits and addiction as time went on. Now, with more knowledge in our hands, we know that lack of self-control and poor habits can ruin our life. It's important we figure out how to overcome lust and control our impulses. And I'm not perfect, but I've spent a lot of time trying to figure it out because I realize how important this is. Improving your self-control is guaranteed to make your life better. Controlling your sexual energy and overcoming your lust isn't something you're taught about from a young age, but I'm going to do my best to help you guys out now. I'm going to mention some things you may have already heard, and I'm also going to mention some things that you haven't already heard. So how do we do it? How do we overcome lust? The first thing we can do is replace the action. We can occupy ourselves with an alternative. A lot of the time when we watch this damaging content, it's because we're bored, if we're honest with ourselves. It's not actually true desire. We need to be able to differentiate between true desire and an addiction to lust. And I'm going to keep coming back to this concept of true desire. If you're honest with yourself, in terms of time, you waste so much of it looking at this damaging content when you could be doing something a lot more productive. You actually have to self-analyze and look at how much time you spend on this negative habit to be able to say to yourself, oh, I could actually be spending my time a lot more wisely. So what can we replace watching this damaging content with? I think there's three main things you can do to replace this negative habit. You can firstly exercise. You have energy built up within you. That's why you want to go and engage in lustful actions. So instead of doing that, you can use that energy to do some exercise, go for a run, do some push-ups or sit-ups in your room. You have this energy built up within you. You can choose to spend it this way and waste your energy on lustful actions, or you can choose to spend it this way in a productive manner that's actually going to build you up. The second way to occupy yourself is to learn. There's so much knowledge to be absorbed. You can watch educational content, you can watch podcasts, you can even read books. There's so much content for you to absorb and apply. You can choose whatever topic interests you. And when you're actually engaged in the topic, you can spend hours learning about the area, which is obviously a more productive use of your time. The third thing you can do is change your environment. More often than not, when you engage in lustful actions and watching damaging content, you're probably in a place of comfort. You're probably in your own room. Go outside of your room, go outside your house. Then you have no option to engage in those actions. You don't really have a choice. The next thing I want to talk about is triggers. You need to remove all the triggers. Scrolling on TikTok, scrolling on Instagram, you're bound to end up seeing something that triggers your mind to want to see more and more. Maybe you were going throughout your day and you didn't feel the need at any point to give in to your impulses. But once you've seen something on social media that triggers your mind, then the impulse becomes stronger, and then obviously it becomes harder and harder to not give in to it. But if we can completely avoid these triggers, it's a lot less likely that we're going to seek out this harmful and damaging content. When you're overcoming lust or any addiction, a lot of it is about making it easy for yourself. So if your main trigger is TikTok, and you know every time you scroll you're going to see something that's going to send you to the other sites, then you know, okay, cool, maybe I got to delete this app. If you're scrolling on Instagram and you see some unholiness and you know it's going to make the urges stronger and it's going to be a lot more difficult to not give into your impulses, then maybe you have to say to yourself, okay, cool, I have to stay off this app for a little bit while I build up my discipline and build up my willpower. I'm going to completely remove the trigger, which is going to make it a lot easier because you're not even thinking about giving into the impulses. And like I mentioned before, it's not true desire. When you see these triggers, it's just stimulating your brain and you feel like you're getting closer and closer to a reward. So you start to give into your impulses and chase that reward. And this takes me on to my next point. A lot of it is about stimulation. We're overstimulating our mind. When we see all these triggers, when we see all this harmful content, we're just stimulating our mind to abnormal levels. And our brain becomes used to this stimulus, which is essentially addiction. We see something on social media, it triggers our brain. We know we can go to the unholy sites and get a reward. So we have to reduce overstimulation as a whole, which is largely social media. So we can choose to reduce the amount of time that we spend on social media, or we can completely remove it altogether. But as well as the removal, we also need to add. So we need to add things that are going to calm our mind, that are going to reduce the stimulation. One of the key ways to do this is by meditating. By meditating, we're allowing our brain to be still. We're allowing our brain to just allow thoughts to pass. We're not actively stimulating it. Meditation takes discipline and focus, but this builds up over time as you practice more and more. And as you practice these less stimulating activities, your brain becomes used to it. It doesn't crave the same overstimulation that it previously was. Reducing the overstimulation of our mind is simply about enjoying the more simple pleasures of life, like meditating, like being out in nature, like reading a book. Things that aren't gonna get your brain jumping all over the place, scrolling from one video to the next, not giving your brain a chance to actually be still and take in what it's seeing. So we need to avoid the overstimulating activities and engage more in the less stimulating activities. And over time, those less stimulating activities will become more pleasurable and a lot easier to engage in because you'll have more focus and discipline. The last method to overcome lust that I want to mention isn't often spoken about, but I think it's very, very powerful, and that is reinforcement. Affirmation of your own beliefs. I was watching a Dr. Huberman podcast and he was talking about intermittent fasting and dopamine release. And he was saying that people that reinforce the benefits to themselves, that affirm their own beliefs, they were seen to have an increase in dopamine, the hormone dopamine being released in anticipation of reward. And as more dopamine is released, because you feel good, this strengthens the habit. The same way this happens with watching damaging content. So when you're trying to overcome lust, it's important to reinforce to yourself why you're trying to overcome it. It's important to reinforce to yourself what you're going to gain from it. It's important to affirm the beliefs that you already have. And this is going to make you believe in what you're doing even more. And you're going to feel good about it because you're going to feel that you're being rewarded for what you're doing. This is a little hack that you can do for anything when it comes to being more disciplined. And I'll do a whole separate video on this because this topic is really interesting, especially when it comes to forming good habits. So when it comes to overcoming lust, these are the things that you can do. But I just want you to remember, true desire is normal. Lustful addictions and not being able to control your impulses, that's when you need to build some discipline. That's when you need to try and overcome lust. I hope you found this video useful. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.